Hello, Tone.
Tony Robbins.
Come on in.
Uh-oh. Halo.
Hi, honey.
How are ya?
Hey, everybody, it's Tony Robbins. Welcome to the Tony Robbins podcast. I get to be here in person for a little bit. Listen, I am really excited about the subject that we have today and also the guests that we have. The subject is the most important subject I know of to controlling human behavior. If you ever asked yourself, why did I try to make a change and try and not really succeed? You're going to understand the answer by the end of this. And more importantly, if you want to create lasting change, the tool that we're going to talk about today is the tool that creates lasting change. And if it's used improperly, it also gets you stuck. And the term or the tool we're talking about is the power of identity. Now, what is identity? Well, we all identify ourselves in different ways. Who are you? Are you a conservative person, an aggressive person? Are you quiet? Are you outgoing? There's so many ways that we define ourselves. And identity is just the culmination of the beliefs you have about who you are. But those beliefs control how you think, how you feel, what you perceive, how you interact with people, what you're willing to do, not willing to do. In fact, I'd submit to you that after 45 years of working with people in 195 countries all over this planet, from the most successful to the most challenged, the single most important element, if I want to understand what's driving that person, is to understand how they define themselves. Because, hear me now, the most powerful force in the human personality is the need to stay consistent with how we define ourselves. And if you think of someone who's having, quote, an identity crisis, what is that? They turn a certain age and they quickly question everything they had accepted. A belief is something you feel absolutely certain about. You don't believe something if you start to question it. You produce doubt. And so sometimes there are certain stages of life where someone suddenly goes out and has this identity crisis and they buy a sports car or whatever the case may be, and they change their hair and they do everything else. But what's really happening is they're trying to redefine themselves, having defined themselves a long time ago. And we all have these ways of defining ourselves, but let me give you an example of just how powerful it is. So I'll give you a simplistic example. I don't know if you ever smoked cigarettes or know someone who did, but if you go to someone who smokes cigarettes and no longer does, and you said to them, would you like a cigarette? They wouldn't say to you, what brand is it? What would they say to you? No, I'm not a smoker. I'm not one of those. And that's really important because we define ourselves by what we are and by what we're not. And it's not effortful when you're not a smoker. It's not effortful if you say, I'm a health nut, to, not smoke. It's just not part of your world. You don't even consider it because that need to stay consistent with how you define yourself is the basis of a human being's basic personality making decisions. Now, the downside of this, of course, is you can create a negative identity for yourself. You can have an identity that says, let's say you've put things off a lot and you're about to go do something and you get fearful. Everybody has the fear of failure, the fear of something, of the unknown. And the last minute, you don't do it. And then you say, I'm really going to do this. And you do it again and again. After a while, you don't want to disappoint yourself. So you might develop a new identity and say, I'm a procrastinator. And once that's who you are, that behavior is going to be consistent. It is that powerful a control system on how we function as human beings. So anything you attach the words I am to over and over again, consistency with your language, with your emotion, and with an emotional intensity, you'll eventually become it because it becomes a belief, and a belief is self-fulfilling. Whether you think you can, whether you think you can't, you're right. So I think this subject, being able to differentiate between having a certain feeling or acting a certain way and being that kind of person is huge. You can use this tool. When I'm working with somebody, I'm looking to create a lasting change. I'm looking to help that person shift how they perceive who they are permanently, not just what they were doing. But I want you to know that today we're going to introduce it to two brilliant people, my two favorite people, my wife, Sage, and my right arm, and our chosen family, Mary. I think a lot of men see identity as this is who I am, this is how I am. But for women, identity can often be a burden because there's so many. Now, I don't see it that way within myself, but some people, it used to be easy. I'm a farmer, I'm a mother. But today, you're the farmer, you're the mother, you're the community activist, right? You're the athlete, you're everything. There's so many pieces. And my hope, and the reason I'm having these two ladies take this over with you, is that when you're done with this, you'll start to question some of your old identities, some of the limitations those might bring. So often people say, I'm not that kind of person. What kind of person? And when did you define yourself? a year ago, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 20 years, 30 years ago. Most people, it was a long time ago. And maybe at the end of this conversation, it's time to update your sense of identity. Maybe it's time to expand it. Maybe it's time to take some of the labels off that might limit you. Maybe it's time to look at some that you want to define yourself by as you move for the next 5 or 10 years of your life of growth and expansion. But I think it's important to understand how powerful this piece is. It can be used as a weapon to separate people. You're one of those. That's often what happens politically in the world we're in today. No matter what, right, left, center, it doesn't matter. I'm more of an independent myself, so it's a little bit easier to see, but even that, I see myself as independent. I want to be able to see both sides. Not everybody has that feeling. Some people think someone who has a different point of view is evil these days. But the point is, why would we use words to limit us when we can expand our spirits, our hearts, and our souls by expanding our identity, not limiting ourselves in some way? And I want you to know most people define themselves by how they've behaved. And here's what I want you to consider. Whatever people do, they're doing the best they can with the resources they have in that moment. Are there smart people who do stupid things? My bet is you're a smart person. You've probably done stupid things. I sure have. Are there, people that are not seemingly high intelligence who do some really bright things? Of course they do. Is it possible for a really mean person you consider mean to be really nice? Yeah, when they're in a really nice state, they will be. Is it possible for a really nice person to be mean? Of course. Everybody's done it in some time. But the difference is your identity. So our identity is more powerful than even the truth. Your beliefs about people shape your relationships with them. And then your beliefs, of course, about yourself are the most powerful of all. And that's why I think this subject is so critical. But here's what I want you to realize. People are not their behaviors. You are not their behaviors. We've all done dumb things, doesn't mean you're dumb. We've all done smart things, doesn't mean you're absolutely smart, right? It's not that black and white. It's not that simple, but that's the way the mind tries to reduce things. That's the reductionism of the mind, not your heart, not your soul, not your spirit, but the mind. It's trying to keep things this or that. It's chopping it down. It's reductionism. You don't want to fall for that. But I want you to know you can also expand your identity, not by telling yourself, I'm great, I'm great, I'm great, but by doing something. It's like self-esteem. I hear so many parents talk about, I want my kids to have so much self-esteem. And I think it's one of the biggest mistakes. And I'm not the only one who believes this. Dr. Was it Beck from Stanford? Carolyn Dweck. I remember reading her books, and she's talking about how we've raised our children and told them they're great all the time and they're wonderful and they're perfect. And what it really does is mess them up. And the research shows it, because then they go in the real world and they aren't perfect. They aren't all the things their parents told them and they've been told their whole life. And now they're scared to try something where they're not who they thought they were, because their identity was larger than who they were, as opposed to rewarding your child for effort. Well, that's amazing effort. Boy, if you keep doing that, you'll achieve whatever you want. That's a true statement. They can grow and expand out of that. So I just want you to understand, there are situations where people get in a certain emotional state. They're scared, they're angry, they're afraid, they're whatever, and they behave a certain way. But if they do that several times, they might say, that's the kind of person I am. And once you do, it's self-fulfilling. Or worse, you know somebody and they were mean to you sometime and they're harsh. Oh, they're such a mean, harsh person. Well, I bet they're different with their child. I bet they're different when they're not under stress. So when we give somebody an identity, we limit our ability to actually reach that soul or that spirit, and we limit our own world. And we put ourselves in a place of judgment of others. And when we're judging others, who's the first person we're going to judge? Ourselves. So this is an area that deserves taking the time to think, really looking at all the consequences of identity, and also understanding it's the controlling force in your life. So it's controlling decision-making. It's controlling your perceptions of yourself. It's controlling perceptions of others. And here's one more thing it controls: how far you grow or fall. So I'll give you a metaphor I like to share with people. Think of it this way. If you set a thermostat on the wall and you set that thing at 68 degrees, and let's use 68 degrees as the metaphor, not for your goals in life, but your comfort zone, which is your identity, right? You might have these huge goals. I want to be this, but have you ever said, I'm going to go do this? And then some voice inside your head says, who are you kidding, right? The who are you kidding is, that's a big reach beyond who you are in your mind at that time. So say 68 degrees represents where you're comfortable financially, not where you want to be, but what you're used to, your current identity. You might say, I want to be financially free, but you're financially struggling, and that's your identity inside your head. You want financially free, but you're financially struggling. You can do the same thing for your body. It's not your ideal, it's what you gotten used to. It's your identity, it's who I am, right? Like I remember I used to say, I'm big boned. That's why I'm overweight. That was my excuse and reason, right? That was my identity for a long time. So I broke that pattern and kept it out. So what happens if you set it 68 degrees, and we're using that as a temperature metaphor, and things get less than you think they should be? Not your goals, but less than your identity. Like all of a sudden you gain 15 pounds during COVID or 20. Or something happens in your body or your relationship that really is uncomfortable, or your finances drop to a certain level. There's a point where it goes 68, 65, 63, somewhere around 60 degrees, maybe 59. Something's going to go on in that computer, and it's going to go, whoa, 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 whoa. What are you doing here at 59? Right? You're a 68 degreeer. And have you ever felt that? Have you ever felt like things got so below your own standard that something and you kicked on and said, this is changing now. Now, the minute, not an hour, I'm doing this now. I'm sure you have. And what happens is the heaters kick on, the drive to get back to where you think your basic identity is. And people do that. They get off drive and suddenly they're pushed and they find the way and they'll usually get there. Or they adjust to a lower identity. And that's what some people do over and over throughout their life. And that's why they're so disappointed. And they have a reason, because somebody betrayed them, because this happened, because something happened in the economy. And all those things probably really did happen. But it was really the drop in identity, because once it's your identity, you find the way. But think of it this way. If things get bad enough, you get this drive to get back to your identity. Not your goals, your identity, right? Your musts. Your must is who you think you are. If all of a sudden you start doing better than you dreamed of, you work harder, you get some breakthroughs, you get some insights, and now emotionally, psychologically, financially, physically, your career, whatever, goes from 68 degrees to 78 to 88 to 90, 99 degrees, around 99 degrees, something happens in your brain, goes, hey, what are you doing? You're a 68 degree, or what are you doing here at 99? You don't belong here. And then what happens? The heaters of drive stop. And if that's not enough, the air conditioners kick in, you start saying things that mess up the relationship. You start sabotaging things in the business. You start sleeping in until you get right back to where you need to be. So I want to just set up for you how important identity is. And throughout your life, my bet is you've had moments that have redefined you. They may have redefined you for a greater sense of who you are and what you're capable of, your spirit and your soul and what you're sharing, or they may have created more limitations because it didn't work out or you didn't do the right thing over and over. And then finally, you don't want to feel bad about yourself, so you created an identity that was less than. I'm inviting you in this session to participate with us and to listen to these two people that I love so much and respect so much, and let them give you their perspective instead of mine about the power of identity, about how you can build it by doing some things that build you into a stronger identity, about where we might want to let go of some of the old identities within ourselves and maybe the people around us. Because so much of identity today is used to define people as a way to separate us. And we're all brothers and sisters on the path. That's really what it is. And so these podcasts, we only do them when we have a subject that we really think is important. And I hope that you'll find this as important as I found it in my life. My goal is really simple. Have people discover that who they are is more than they think they are, and have them have experiences that stack that so they know it's true. And then from that expanded perspective, more of their heart, their soul, their spirit, their ability comes out. And I got a lot of identities too. I got father and husband and friend and business owner and athlete. And I go on and on and on. I actually enjoy those. I don't feel the pressure from those. But I know for not all people, but for some women, the demands are different. I think it might have to do with moms and the way we're brought up. But rather than me speculate on a woman's perspective, it's made me more sensitized, because I have very positive feelings around identity, but I've also worked very consciously to shape and create it in myself and others. But not everybody does. And it can be the greatest tool for your growth, or it can be the greatest weapon for your separation, or for a weapon against yourself. And I think this conversation is one that's really important to have. And so that's why I want to drop in and kind of set the tone for this podcast, and then pass it on to my dear ones here, my Sage and our Mary.
Gosh, Tone, that was, thank you, Tony. Just a second, I'm catching up with you here.
Are we back to Tony again?
We are.
Thank you, Tony.
Tony?
You never call me Tony.
You're right. Tone, thank you for the introduction, your insight, your perspective, your life experience. And, you spoke about many identities and hats that you wear. Something that I think is such a beautiful inquiry that they use in the East is who am I beyond the external identities?
Yes.
Who's the one that looks through the lens of life? Who's the one that sits in that seat of your soul that's unmovable,
Yes.
that's unnameable?
That is
That
not
is,
your body. You're not your body. You're not
yes,
your emotions. What
true.
are you? You're something
Yes.
deeper and more than all of the above.
Deeper, vaster, that goes beyond. Because, when you mention about whether it's men or women, just human beings that can get overwhelmed by identities. From my own experience, I think part of that is because there's unconscious expectations of who we're supposed to be under each of those umbrellas.
Yes.
And yet, what I'm interested in, curious about to share, Mary and Tone, in this conversation is really an identity that I can't say is larger, but is vaster than all of them. And that
More
is where
expansive, yes.
and it's that where we all meet in this human experience called life.
Yes.
And so, Mary, I can't thank you enough because I've thoroughly enjoyed, just sharing and exploring and sharing our own life experience with all those listeners out there who've had the curiosity to join. So I can't thank you enough. Tony, thank you once again for joining the Tony Robbins podcast.
We just love the Tony Robbins podcast.
We do.
That's what we're trying to say.
Oh, that's great. Well, I hope that what comes out of this is a larger, more expansive identity beyond anything you've limited yourself to be before, that we've limited ourselves to be before, not only for ourselves, but for others. And I can't imagine better hands to pass that to than the two of you. So I'm going to pass the ball to you. Everyone enjoy the podcast. We'll look forward to your comments and hearing what you pulled from this for your own life and for your family and for your business and for your community. Blessings to you all.
Well, I want to start like we often do when it's just you and I sitting here at the table. I like to start with a little Tony Robbins trivia. To all you listeners out there.
I thought you were going to ask me. I was gonna say, I might not pass.
Okay, no, it's an all play. You are also involved. You're involved. But listeners, viewers, I also want to ask you if you have been to many either Tony Robbins seminars or if you are a graduate of the audio program or however you're coming to the Tony Robbins podcast today. I might say, what is Tony's teaching on identity? People are into quotes. Tony has a very famous quote about identity. And it is, do you want to play?
No, I think you're going to play those.
I didn't want to put you on the spot, Mrs. Robbins. That's why I was going to open it up to the audience. I bet many of you got it right because Tony, this is one of those things that he often says, write this down now. The strongest force in the human personality is the need to stay consistent with how we define ourselves. I'm not going to read it again, but think about that again. The strongest force, and there's so many things that I would argue are very strong, invisible forces in this life of ours. And for Mr. Tony Robbins to say that the strongest force in our personality is the need to stay consistent with how we define ourselves. So with our self-concept or our identity, like, let's get into that a little bit. Unpack that, as they say, Sage Robbins. What does that mean?
Gosh. Well, just what I'm being shown inside my own mind is, the ideal or the projection that, I'm good, let's just say. I'm a good person. And by nature, I am a good person. We all are a good person. But can a good person do something foolish? Can a good person be blind? Can a good person be unconscious?
You actually, in many ways, are saying what Tony teaches and really drives home at something like Date with Destiny or something where he says, our behavior is not our entire identity. Like, people are not their behavior. People sometimes have behavior that meets needs of theirs, but it's really not anything. It's not their core essential identity, whatever that is. So honestly, throughout this podcast, I think we're asking questions. This is really open-ended. This is so open to interpretation. I think that's why it's such an interesting topic to come at with, like you said, curiosity, because it's like, what are we even talking about? This concept of self, like, what does that mean? It gets mind-blowing to me really fast.
And that's where I think, identity of a larger perspective is that we're all human. We're all human, no matter what we're all human beings having this human experience. We all, in certain contexts and certain references, may make different choices. Does that make us good? Does that make us bad? No, I think that makes us human. I think that makes us human. And a lot of times these identities, it's like, gosh, I'm a mother, I'm a daughter, I'm a wife, I'm, what other
sister,
identities?
a friend,
Yeah, sister,
a CEO,
a friend. I mean, all these different identities that we can put on ourselves, but it's like those threads represent a portion of me. They represent a fractal of me, but does it represent all of me? Does it represent all of you? All the, I'm Christian, I'm Catholic. I'm X political party. I'm this, I'm that, and a lot of times these labels, these words, these descriptions are limiting. Never mind to ourself and our own perception of ourself or others, but language deducts. It locks. It's not expansive enough, because the truth is It's like we're human beings. It's like the being part of the human actually makes me most curious. Who am I? And in the Eastern cultures, they'll do inquiry of, or they'll do a process of, meditation. It's like, I'm not my body. I'm not my mind. And so it's okay. If I'm not my body and, I chop off my legs, my arms, maybe completely up to right here, am I still me? And who is that me? What is that essence, that isness, that...
Yes.
Who's the one that's looking at me, at you right now through these eyes? Who's the one that's perceiving this? That's unmovable within us, that is vaster than all of it, than all the labels we can put on it. That makes me really curious.
All in all, I'm all for self-expression. I want people to be anything they want to be in every moment. We get one shot at this vast life experience. Why not be all? And that's why Tony would argue, the best thing that we can do for ourselves is to expand our identity. And how do you do that? You do something that is inconsistent with your self-image. Like Tony always says, do something you would never do.
Yes.
And why is that so hard for people? Because we have these constraints somehow that get put on us through, I guess, conditioning, through our childhood, through our past, a whole notion of psychobabble, or maybe we just we're a reflection of our culture and the times that we live in, and so we are the water that we're swimming in. But I think that's really what the heart of even personal development and self-help in this industry that has a lot of criticism around what are you really doing all this for? It's like, I think what are we really doing all this for? It's to expand our identity while we can and be as much as we can before time runs out. Something like that.
No, I hear you on that, Mary. I think that's, very accurate, and to expand and also to question. Here's a beautiful example. I was raised, Christian, went to church and had that beautiful imprinting and upbringing, and still completely and utterly alive within me. And I remember maybe about 14 years ago, we went to Dubai, and, I'd never been in a Muslim culture. Everything that I learned, can't even say, I didn't learn from my experience. I'd either heard or maybe read. And so it was all a projection. I hadn't had, and I think this is something so unique, and a lot of times that's missed in today's society, is that, we have identities on individuals or groups of people, but it's like if you actually met and sat down and had an intimate exchange with somebody from that community or somebody from that religion or somebody from that demographic. And, I had the privilege, Tony and I met with this group of people, and we were doing an event there actually. And, the men and the women, they had separate experiences. Tony went to the mosque with this group of gentlemen and had a really lovely experience. And for myself, I was, maybe there was about 100 women. Everybody was in burqas. And so I wore a burqa to be respectful, just entering that reality and that culture. these beautiful women from all ages, they taught me. They taught me what they were doing and washing their hands and washing their mouth and washing their feet, and gave me the context of the why. They held me, they fed me, they prayed with me. It was, when I think back to like just spiritually really rich experiences I've had in my life, that's one of them. And
Why do you think that's so meaningful?
I think it's so meaningful because it completely obliterated possibly everything. It's like narratives, you know what I mean? It's like the narrative, who is this, who is a Christian, who is a Jewish person, who is a Muslim, individual. And we have, and by the way, you can put any of those individual identities of religions, and we all have, not we all have, but there's preconceived notions or assumptions, projections that, I picked up in the group mind, or that we pick up through, media or different sources and so forth. And I think it's just so beautiful to pierce that veil and to be open and willing enough to have an experience for yourself. And that experience, it schooled me. Yeah. It opened me. It rearranged everything I'd ever heard. Like, it was they were such beautiful people, and they were so in service. They wanted to take care of us at every moment. I remember leaving there and just being so struck at how I felt ushered through this beautiful culture, how I felt welcomed into this home, into this prayer circle of these women, how I felt seen, how I felt accepted, even though I was the only blonde-eyed, blue-eyed girl in the room, and nor did I speak the language. We spoke the same language of the heart. Like, there was just, because there was only our faces showing, there was something right about everything else disappearing. And there was just such an intimacy with that.
That's a really also, like, even I hadn't thought about it until you said that. As I'm picturing it in my mind, right, you're in a burqa, so all you see are each other's eyes. So yes. Also to almost make yourself invisible.
Yes.
What a unique way to come at identity when you're actually, your physical self is invisible. Because I think, as is human nature, a lot of us do get stuck in the physicality of this life.
Very
well,
true.
We know that there's, like you said, to your point, I could shave my head, I could cut off a pinky, I could cut off a foot or a whole leg. I'm still Mary, aren't I? So then if you cover your whole self and you're just looking into each other's eyes. And when I hear that story from you, I also think it's so beautiful that, say there's a little bit of an in-group, out-group happening. So you're coming into this group of Muslim women, and they are welcoming you. Like, there's no, that's what's missing to me today, is like, I think it's great if you have your groups. And I think as humans, we all want to belong to groups and communities. But can we still invite others in? Like, are we so deeply immersed? I just think that like, those women are an awesome example of being like, come see what we're doing. Thank you for your willingness. Thank you for your curiosity. Thank you for your, showing up. And now, like, let us give you an experience of us.
I was highly impacted by that. And I've thought about those women and just the entire experience many, many, many times. And honestly, it's one of the first things that just came to mind through this whole conversation. I'll tell you another context that's different. It's more political. We have two dear friends of ours that have a horse rescue, that they save horses from slaughter. And so they are working passionately. They're forces in nature. And not only do they help to save the horses, but they're also really proactively working to pass a bill to end horse slaughter here in America. And they've made extraordinary headway. And so you were there. We all had dinner together. The four of us had dinner one night. And what so struck me listening to their conversation was, they probably lean a little bit more left, let's say Democratic. And so they, that's one side of the perspective. But, in order to get a bill passed, you want to have, what's called bipartisan
support.
Support on both perspectives. And so they were going to meet with the, Republican candidates and so forth. And they were sitting at the table and they were like, you know what? They were actually really cool. Like, they were really supportive. And in my mind, I'm like, what else did you think they would be, And yet it struck me Because once again, it's like, who did they believe them to be? They believe them to be who possibly they've heard or they've read. Maybe somebody has spoken about contextually, but it's like, did they have their own experience? And when they had their own experience, they were like, what? These are just really cool people, and almost like,
they like horses.
Yes.
Why did Republicans like horses too?
But that really struck me.
It was a funny moment.
It's a beautiful moment. It was the same moment as, my own flight to Dubai and experiencing such a different contextual religion than what I was brought up in. For them, it was this world, and we can all have this myopic view, but in that view, there's blinders, In our beliefs of words, there's blinders, and it gets really narrow. And that was a moment where the blinders started to open, and let some light in, illumination of experience, of reference points of who are these individuals. And, they talked about their humor, they talked about their willingness, they talked about their open-mindedness. And it was all like you could feel, just almost like I couldn't believe it. And I found watching that and observing that, I was like, wow, how beautiful. Like, this is the human experience. I think, that we're willing to, and it doesn't have to be, but I think life will offer it to us out of need that shifted their experience. You know what I mean? Out of a need and a hunger to push this through in order to save these animals that are so beloved. Yeah. They put themselves in a context that maybe they wouldn't have associated in.
Yep.
Maybe they wouldn't have sought out. But because of their love and their passion, they did. But by doing so, pulling away like the blinders and then having a personal experience, and that personal experience surprised them. Yeah. And I remember I barely even spoke a word at that dinner. I actually was just so interested in observing, and then just noticing, gosh, I all the moments and times in my own life when I've had blind spots. And, for those of you who are listening, the labels and the identities, the community, whatever the label is, it's like, you had mentioned about, am I married? Does that change me being married? It's like, are we our name? Are we our family's name? Are we our religion? Are we our political party? Who are we? Who am I? I think that's such a profound question to ponder, and can also create a lot of confusion at times, because it's like, gosh, then we want to, build more identities of who I am. Well, I'm a lawyer. I'm a golfer. Yeah. It's like even our daughter the other day, she was, taking swimming classes, and, I caught myself, because it's like, oh, she's a swimmer. It's like, is she a swimmer, or is she actually learning how to swim? Because once again, if I put the label on her, she's a swimmer, it's then, oh, this, our little daughter, she feels like, oh, I have to be a swimmer. I'm Michael Phelps. And it's like, no, she's just really enjoying the water. Yeah. She's really enjoying the pool. How cool. So she's learning how to swim. I think the I am and what we put after I am is something to be mindful of.
That's really it. Right?
Something to be mindful of. And I think that I am, that we all are, whatever you call that isness, that vastness, our true nature, the essence, what you really can't put a name or label in, and yet we all touch up upon it. There's that like longing inside of ourselves to recognize that, to align with that reality. I think that's just a really beautiful question and a really beautiful reality to recognize that we are larger than the labels we put on ourselves, and we are larger than the labels that we adopt through our conditioning, through our upbringing, through the external, society. Are we this political party, that political party, this particular race, that particular race, or are we really brothers and sisters on the path?
Right.
All walking each other home. Like how that feels inclusive, like how that feels just automatically benevolent. You know what I mean? Supportive. Is that I don't know that it's not fair to say higher or lower, because it's just another perception to perceive, others, rather than, who the stickies or the labels that we put on them or on ourselves. I don't know if that
even just saying,
translates.
well, yeah, right. Because I think even saying others, then you're getting into that duality of self and other. And as soon as
Yes.
it's self, me, myself, I, ego, whatever you want to call it, I don't know. Like if you're listening and any part of you has had any like little touch of an experience of oneness, like if you really do somewhere, if you search your soul and your heart of hearts, believe that we on this planet, everything living, breathing, is one, somehow connected, the connected universe, then it just makes me kind of be like, what are we arguing about right now in 2022? Like, it feels to me like we're taking steps backwards in our specificity. Like Tone teaches about the importance of chunking, right? So like if you have if you have to wash an elephant, somebody take the tail, somebody take the leg, somebody take the other leg, you have to break it into chunks. But if you over chunk something, then it actually becomes really complex. And right now I feel like we're almost over chunking the fact that it's like, well, we're all humans. If we can just like remember that there's at least some sort of umbrella over us all that connects us. And identity, it almost seems like this heavy thing that we're like pushing up a hill right now as a collective, because it's just, it feels like people are having a hard time agreeing. And I also think it's human nature to want to make sense of the world and where we're all coming from. But like, let's use Adrian, for example, our brilliant sound tech, who it's his birthday today. And we had a little conversation before we walked in here and sat down, and we kind of always like to get the teams, everybody's weighing in at a different time. So Adrian, at the ripe old age of 25, Adrian, I didn't tell you I'd be sharing this, but happy birthday to you. He said something like, who are you? Who am I? What does that question even mean? And that's exactly it to me. It's like, what does that even mean? Who are you? And then is that different to you than if I said, like, what are you? Like, what are you? Are you a writer, a doctor, a dentist, a school teacher? What? And then that's somehow different than like, who? What are you even asking me? Who am I? How would we even choose what things we're going to let define us? It just seems so nuts to me.
And yet so beautiful that, we are all, I think that's where we all meet. I think no matter where we come from, that question knocks on all of us to understand, to touch upon. And I think life, I don't think life, from my own experience, life has almost been like a learning, but an unlearning of who I thought I was. It's almost like the ideals in society and in ideals as a family, or, being the woman, the wife, the
Roles
daughter,
that you
the
play.
roles, that's the word I'm looking for, the roles, which are really another form of identity.
Ideals. Yeah, and identity. Yeah.
And what's so interesting is, I'm the same, not the same, like I have the same love of service, or like I'm a love. I want to offer that love. I want to extend that love. But at this stage of my life, it comes from a different place. I feel like in my maybe 20s and 30s, it was who I thought I was supposed to be. And I even said to Tony one time, I was like, honey, I said, like, seeing him as husband, I didn't realize that I had unconscious expectations for that identity. He would have had unconscious expectations for me as wife. And I felt like through our, I don't know, it's been, say, 20 some odd years, it was like an unlearning or an unraveling or a removal of all that. And then it's just like this beautiful human being that God gave me to love. This beautiful human being that God gave me to love.
God gave you to love is too much of a stretch.
Okay,
it's like if someone's put in front of you in your life path,
this beautiful individual that, okay, if you don't want to say God, this beautiful individual, if you want to drop that identity, this beautiful universe just blessed me with this individual that I get to share this experience and love. That's I mean, there's nothing more profound, and also to get to know oneself through that mirrorship. I think that that's an amazing art, and there's a beautiful freedom to move beyond. I'll just speak for myself, to move beyond who I thought I was supposed to be, and holding that architecture up with the behavior around that, cumbersome, clunky, and then removing that. And it's almost like, I'll give you a great example. Your mama, Mary, or my mama for that, my parents. It's like, sometimes we grow up, we see our parents as, you see your mom as mom.
Yeah.
And many times you'll say
that
to me,
identity carries a lot of expectation.
and many times you'll say to me, like, what, your mom, like, mom just, I'll be talking to Mary's, sorry, I'm not giving you context. Many times I'll be on the phone with Mary's mom, and I'll hang up and I'll share what she shared. And she's like, your mom, like, my mom just said that. She just talked about that. And you're baffled because I don't see your mommy as mom. I see her just as this really cool human being, this really cool woman, and speak to her as a friend from that perspective. And so sometimes she shares differently with me than she would with you. And yet, as I watch you experience and get to know and get curious about your mom beyond who you believe she is as a mother.
Selfishly, who she should be to me, her daughter. Like, it goes from shocking to what you elicit from my mom to like heartbreaking quickly for me, because I realize like I'm not drawing that part of her out because of the way that I am limiting her, the totality of her identity, by just being like, Mom. Like, what a punk.
No, it's beautiful too.
But I see how I do that to my own mom. Then I take it out wider and deeper, and you see how most kids do that to all moms.
Yes.
Most kids do that
At
to
times.
their dads. There's those identities. In previous podcasts, we've called them archetypes. You used the word narratives earlier, which label. Okay, so, and just like if I stick one word on you, whether it's race, religion, ethnicity, if I just put one word on you, people will have all kinds of things come to mind for that one word. And then so we try to tell a story. Like, I think our identity is also the story that we tell about our lives, I guess, the story of who I am. The narrative of who I am. I'm trying to make sense of it. I don't know.
Well, I have to ponder that, the narrative of who I am, because the narrative would be anything that's collected. So that's in the past. And so who I am, similar to meditation, can only be experienced here now. And yeah, go ahead. But what's the but?
But like, I would say, if I'm going to look up the definition, the dictionary definition of identity, but that's what people would say. It's like the collection of your memories. I know there's no, it's like, if we go that far, there's no such thing as past future. There's only now. So if I could just start it's like if you just like woke up out of something and could create yourself afresh, starting right now.
Beautiful notion, isn't it?
It'd be awesome. But no one would do it.
Well, is that true?
Because the strongest force in the human personality is the need to stay consistent with how we define ourselves. You could be totally different from one moment to the next if you want it to be.
I kind of am.
Might surprise some people. You are.
A little bit.
You actually really are.
Yes.
I'm going to read you a little quote.
Okay, I'd love to.
I have it on my phone this time. It is from Albert Einstein in the Einstein Papers. Albert says, a human being is part of the whole, called by us universe. A part limited in time and space, he experiences himself, his thoughts and feelings as something separate from the rest. A kind of optical delusion of consciousness. This delusion is a kind of prison for us, restricting us to our personal desires, to affection for a few persons nearest to you. Our task must be to free ourselves from this prison by widening our circle of compassion to embrace all living creatures and the whole of nature in its beauty. Einstein famously was like, he wasn't nationalistic. He didn't want to be known as a German. He was a citizen of the world. Like, he was constantly taking most people, if you say who's the brightest mind in history, probably 99% of people say Einstein, right? I don't know. Pretty smart guy. We all agree pretty much on that. And here, what is his like core belief? If we want something to model, it's this idea that like, don't restrict who you are called to love and feel is this tiny little circle of the people that you are around you. That, and keep going. Keep going.
It's really beautiful. I love that you discovered that. It's really profound, and I feel covers oneness, the interconnectedness of all life, and a willingness to touch upon that, here now. I mean, even the oneness of here we are in this room, you're here, I'm here. And then all those of you that we have the privilege to share this conversation with that will be tuning in, that interconnectedness of this amazing technology that links us all, that really amazes me. And I think it's super cool. And I think it's really beautiful in all means that there's all these invisible forces, this web of this existence that weaves this web that connects us. And that's the true oneness of one mind, one heart.
It traverses space and time, which I know we're getting out there. Mm-hmm. That usually is one for me to even try to like wrap my head around. Like I know conceptually it's true, but then I'm like, it feels really linear and it feels like there's space and time, but like we're having a conversation. People in this room, Ethan, Adrian, are listening to it in real time, our dog. But then there's people across time that will listen to it today, tomorrow, next week, 3 months from now. But it's like, right, like, so what, it just, again, there's a lot of just little mind-blowing moments in this conversation of like, who are we? Who are we really? Tony just finished a business mastery or one business mastery seminar of the year. And one of the questions that he asks entrepreneurs and business folks alike is, what business are you in? What business are you really in? And we can ask that, I think, of ourselves and of our life and of our identity, like, who am I? And see what your brain comes up with. And like, no, like, who are you really? Like, who's 10-year-old Sage, 20-year-old, 50-year-old, 80-year-old, 90-year-old? Like, what is the essence of who you are? And if you're listening, I hope that springs you into a little bit of processing about, like, what is the essential part of you? What do you want it to be?
Well, I love that you mentioned about age. My grandpa used to always say, my grandpa Bob, he'd say, honey, he's like, I look at myself in the mirror and sometimes I forget that I'm this age. And I'll see like my body and my face. He was in his 80s at the time. And he's like, who the heck is this guy? But that struck me. And now, I'm in my 40s. And it feels different because the isness that we are, the essence that we are, doesn't age. It's timeless. It's eternal. It is. And so it's like, what? That isness, that... there's no words that does it justice, but the consciousness, you could use that word, the awareness that is perceiving through these eyes, that's watching it all, was the same one at 10, is the same one here in my 20s, my 30s, my 40s, and my grandpa in his 80s. And I think, does body change? Does the external matter shift and change? But that's the unmovable reality of us all. And I think that is where we really meet. And that is a recognition or a realization that's the exterior changing identities or expressions of who we are. Mm-hmm. That's the part that is unchangeable.
Right. Or time, or out of time. Or I've heard, I think it was Joe Goldstein say, like, okay, so say our Adrian here is 25 today. I've heard Joe make the remark, like, how old is your breath that's coming out right now? How old's your breath? Is it 25? Is it like right now? Like, how old? Oh, your leg is tingly? How old is the sensation in your leg? Oh, you're hungry? How old is your hunger? Is it 25 years old? Or is it like, there's things that it's like, I can't make sense of this rationally, logically. And identity is one of those things that I just have. It feels, when I start to talk about it, it makes me laugh because it's just like, no, like, what are we? How do we even attempt to describe that? It just, I don't know. We have and then we have personality tests. Like at Robbins Research, we rely on something called the DISC test. People may have heard of it, DISC. William Marston was the psychologist who also, fun fact, also invented Wonder Woman, the comic. He invented the DISC test based on these personality defining markers. A lot of people are familiar with the big 5 personalities. So, but then is personality the same thing as identity? Most people would say no, it's different. But like, well, then what is that?
From my own experience anyways, it's, who I think I'm supposed to be rather than the essence of who I am. So that's the unmovable, unchangeable perspective within us all. And then the personality, from my own self, the personality a lot of times was, another name for it is like cellophane self. It's the person that
You think you're supposed to be.
Well,
Because of conditioning, socially, familial.
So innocent.
Yeah.
So it's so innocent. And I think that's a beautiful gift of this existence, is the shedding or the unlearning or, the removing the masks, so that it's like, oh, there she is. There it is. There, you can't even name it male, female, truthfully, because it's just there, that essence that, when you look in the mirror, it's really beautiful too. I watch our little one, and as she perceives herself in the mirror, and it's so beautiful to watch, just, her look inside her own eyes. We forget to do that,
Yeah.
we look into others' eyes, but to actually look in the mirror, and don't look at, your hair or your face or whether you're shaved or makeup or that, but just actually looking in your eyes and see who's looking back. I think that's such a profound exercise, and I see it every day with our little one, and I'm reminded by that innocence. I'm reminded of the awe and the curiosity to discover oneself, and that's an art often forgotten because, through the limits of identification, the limits of personality, it can be a little bit more fixed, even though it's not.
I have a question for you.
Okay. Is this real?
Is this real?
Oh, okay. Can I just have a sip of water?
Sure.
Are my cheeks like blazing? I'm just as warm as I could be.
So, Sage, I have a question for you. When I was growing up, it was much more. I remember as like a kid, we would say this funny thing like, "You're having an identity crisis." I don't hear it as much anymore, probably because people just don't make jokes people don't make jokes anymore, maybe, really. Just kidding. But Erik Erikson is who actually coined the term, I'm told, essentially about an identity crisis. So here's my question for you. This is from a little excerpt here that says, probably Erikson's most famous concept has been that of the identity crisis, which was designed to point to the central conflict of adolescence. Quote, each youth must forge for himself some central perspective and direction, some working unity out of the effective remnants of his childhood and the hopes of his anticipated adulthood. A young person must find some resemblance between what he perceives in himself and what his sharpened awareness tells him others judge him and expect him to be. So I read that, and I thought that was an incredibly interesting thing. Like, wait a minute. So it's not even how we define ourselves. There is, even Erikson, as he described it, was like also like you're bumping up against what then others expect you to be because of either this identity that you've claimed or this identity that they've put on you, or some that you've mutually negotiated, let's say. That's getting into some murky waters, if you ask me. What do you make of an identity crisis, so to speak? And I also, do you resonate at all with, like, he's saying that's a trademark of adolescence, but I think it's also, forget adolescence, I think there's some marking of going from youth to
Yes.
a mature, respectable elder, responsible human being, where you have some sense of identity working for you. You might not verbally describe it, but you know who you are.
Or not.
Or not. Okay, exactly.
Or not.
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, as I listen to that quote, my only reference would be as an identity crisis, because I don't know his complete understanding of that, but would be it's like the death of the old and the birth of the new. And I think that that's happening every moment in our lives, We've talked about this before. It's like I can look back at photos of myself 5 years ago, 2 years ago, 10 years ago, and think, gosh, I wouldn't wear the clothes that I was wearing today. Or sometimes I think, gosh, what was I thinking? But I have compassion for her and just, can witness just that as we all grow and evolve. And so I think that the identity crisis sometimes is the death of who we thought we were, the death of who we thought we should be. And even I think it's one thing, like you'd mentioned in his quote, I think that's one of the reasons sometimes why we move away as kids, is to give ourselves some distance from our parents or our elders, so that there's one less of that wall or that voice believing that, oh my gosh, I have to please or I have to be this in order to, serve them. So I think it's, we all find our way, we all find our path, and it's all unique to each of us. But I think... it's all unique to each of us. And I think something that we can get curious about is questioning, what identities do you cling to, or what identities in your own life do you find limiting? Do you find restrictive? What's a broader perspective or label or identity? Or is it a matter of removing them and recognizing that you're more than that label? I think that's an inquiry to consider, and taking a look at, I wrote one here, what identities are possibly limit you or locking you in a fixed reality, rather than the spaciousness or the spaciousness to experience more of yourself, I think that's all of our path home.
I do too. I'm glad that you said, how did you say it just now? You said something in there that really hit. I'm knocked out because I was in a little revelry, actually. You said something that made me realize when I was like maybe in my 20s, I used to downright like fantasize about the idea of like, I just want to go somewhere and where no one knows me and there's no like where I could basically just start fresh. And it's not like anybody knew me in my town. As much as it was just like this, something that was so like tantalizing to me about like, what if I could just be in a place where anything, I think part of it stemmed from my own personal experience would be like, I was, as a little kid, as you probably imagine, like I was such a little tomboy. And I remember sometimes, say, our soccer team would have to dress up on days of games. So we'd have to wear like a dress, right? And it wasn't that I didn't want to wear a dress. It was, I knew that when I would get to school in a dress, everybody would be like, oh, you're wearing a dress. And it's like, yeah, I am. It's not that I couldn't get out the door in something that that felt way outside of my identity. It was like, and now people are going to expect me. I don't know what it meant, but it's my earliest memory of like, whoa, like, why is this such a big deal? Like, and then feeling like I just want to go to a place where I have tabula rasa to be anything I want. And it's probably why some people maybe run away or lose touch with people. I would think it's just like this really innocent desire to just live your life.
How cool, a tomboy wearing a dress. Unexpected. Who's to say that those two can't go together? I don't know.
Well, where were you in 6th grade? Because I was crying my eyes out under my bed. I had one other note here that I just think I scribbled a bunch of things down when we said we were going to talk about identity.
Okay.
And one of the things was that it's proven that there's more diversity within groups of, say, men, women, race, ethnicity, however you want to chunk the group. There's more diversity within groups than there is between groups. So I just think that's another example of like, this is why identity kind of makes me laugh, because I just think it's like, aren't we all individuals, connected individuals? And we have all kinds of traits, but like, why would any decided upon group of traits why would that be any more essential to you than anything else? It just feels like, I don't know.
And so I think that's what's so cool. We are all here to express our own isness and how it flows through us in its own unique way. And I think that is the most gorgeous discovery of this life, is to recognize our uniqueness and yet our likeness. Because, there's a fragrance to you. There's an essence to you. There's a beautiful essence to, you, Ethan, or to Tone, or to whomever. Everybody expresses that isness, that consciousness uniquely. And, to summarize this conversation on identity, what's beautiful is who am I is a profound question, and it's a question in the East that is inquired much more meaningful. And, they're not looking to the outside. They're rather looking inside. And maybe that's where the answer lies. And a lot of times we are looking at who am I for this external representation or this external, label, this external identity. Through my travels to India, I was just so struck at how they contemplate and ponder that reality of I am. I am that I am. Touching upon that and observing that, I think is a really beautiful question. And I can't answer that for anybody. I can't answer that for you. You can't answer that for me. And hopefully through this conversation, at least, maybe there's been some space created, an opening, aha. And in that space, you can inquire, you can perceive the gorgeous, beautiful self that you are. And thank you for joining in. Thank you for your own curiosity. Thank you for your own, inquiry, your own hunger. It's beautiful. It's what's guided us all here. And Mary B, I enjoy every one of these conversations with you. So thanks for continue to come back.
I do, with curiosity, every time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Did that work? What would you? Was there anything I said that
honestly, I think when I took me a second to say hello there, because I was actually looking through my through line, and I actually think I set a frame because I know what we shared, and so. Perfect. Yeah, it set a frame beyond it being female. And from my own experience, looking back on my own life and from my own perspective today, identity has been overwhelming from who I believe I'm supposed to be under each of those umbrellas.
I understand.
And therefore, I think the true inquiry of this, or the true intent of this, is, in this whole human experience, beyond all of our identities, where do we meet? And who am I? Who are we? Beyond those external personalities, the external conditioning, the external labels. And that's a discussion and inquiry that I'm excited to have and to explore today.
And so I think it may have to do with how the culture has conditioned women to be everything to everyone. That may make that demand. But I think it's an important point to still get across because it is radically different. I'm just here to tell you, talking to men and women in this area. And I remember that conversation. And because of that conversation, I ask a lot more questions of women now, even when I do it. And I can see that it is often held as a burden. So your goal of bringing it to the highest point where we all meet, I think is great.
And
but
universal beyond male, female. Because I also
but I still think you want to meet them where they are.
But I also believe, I agree with you, but I also, this is my projection and an assumption. I don't know that this is accurate. I would have to question whether it's male, female. I think there can be some generalizations under that umbrella depending upon the individual that we're thinking of, like the nature of the masculine energy, the nature of the woman. But I do believe, from my own experience, that it's who I believed I needed to be and the ideals and the projection of that.
That's great.
And
so,
I still wear all those hats.
I'm just saying, I think it's important. I think it's still important to not limit it to that, but to acknowledge that women's expectations of their own body would be a perfect example of identity is ridiculous, and it is culturally conditioned.
It is culturally
and men think that's like videos we showed. Men think they're cool when they're 30
they have
pounds
a hairy
overweight.
ass. It's awesome.
They're hairy ass and they're 30 pounds overweight, and they think man, I'm a woman. I'm a man. I'm the God's gift to women, right? And it's like what some men think that area, and it's a perfect example of the difference in identity. Like their standard, what they was expected, versus you look at it as it's a set of rules I got to somehow try to meet.
True.
And so
I hear that.
maybe use that as the reference point to it, but I don't want you to leave that out. I know what you're doing is even more important, but I think it's important to acknowledge that difference because I think people on either side, and as you said as well, some men will think this way, some women will feel this way.
Yeah, there's just inclusivity on both perspectives.
Yes, I agree.
I think it's more accessing female energy or accessing male energy, or what is more out of balance or in balance within the individual. I think that would reflect that more. And I hear 100% what you're saying, and I think that's
The
completely
example I just gave you, you can
Yes.
forget about all that; it'll still be the same.
And I agree. And
Right.
I think that's conditioned responses
That's my
to
point.
how we relate to our bodies.
That's
and
my
who
point.
we think we need to be physically.
That's right.
100%.
And that's an identity the culture has given.
It is.
Right? It has nothing to do with women are freaked out about that, who are beautiful inside and out, but they don't see it very often because of the conditioned identity of who they're supposed to be.
And that's part of the
And
identity
the men
crisis.
are not having that same experience.
And that's part of the identity crisis for a lot of women coming to their 40s.
Correct.
Because it's like, oh my gosh, I'm losing my external, maybe athletic body or my beauty power or whatever that looks like. And then as that all strips away, we get to really actually know our true nature, or we have the opportunity to. Life is inviting us to a life beyond the external.
Correct.
Therefore, the arrow is printed back inside of ourselves, because as that body falls away, or what was once up is all of a sudden hanging down.
Yeah.
It's like, hey, or where you didn't have hair, you do. You know what I mean? It all happens. Like life changes on all
Ironic,
perspectives.
too, because just as like your body is going in a direction, maybe like say at 40 years old, when at 20 I was an athletic Adonis, and now
Still are, maybe.
but stupid as far as life experience goes, and then you hit 40, so one thing's going one way, and at the
Other
same
part.
time it's like,
Yes.
and I'm just catching my stride in another way.
And catching your stride
and
and
catching a
the
stride is you actually have expanded your identity. If you
Yeah.
think about you, right, it's a perfect example.
Yeah.
Like
You've
even when
been
you
such a
introduced
beautiful
yourself in that
representation of
parking lot, I was touched by the way you introduced yourself in the parking lot the other day when you said to the guy at the VIP thing, look, I'm a mom and I'm doing this, right?
Yeah.
And when you said it, Mary B, there was just a full ownership of that at such a different level that it was a different woman when you described yourself in that moment physiologically as a woman I knew 4 years ago, let's say. It was beautiful. So you could use
I
that
hear
as the
you.
metaphor.
I hear you.
And then of course everybody flexes between them.
The truth is we already recorded it. So we're going to bridge those two.
Okay. All right, we're out of here.
Thank you.
Thank
Ethan,
you.
you're awesome.